The other part of humanitarian aid is it does, if we can get so much aid in there that it does alleviate the current crisis, it does give Israel more time to finish Hamas, which is obviously in their own strategic interests. In most countries that were attacked like they were on October 7th would have that as their overall objective.
Rishi Sunak is calling for a thorough and transparent investigation into the killing of those aid workers, including 3 British nationals. Rishi Sunak spoke with Benjamin Netanyahu this evening. A spokesman said the UK expects to see immediate action by Israel to end restrictions on aid and repair and protect infrastructure, including infrastructure in hospitals. Benjamin Netanyahu has admitted that Israel was behind the strike, which killed 7 people who were working for the food charity World Central Kitchen.
There was a tragic incident of an unintended strike of our forces of innocent people in the Gaza Strip. This happens in war. We are checking this thoroughly. We are in touch with the governments, and we will do everything for this not to happen again.
US National Security Council spokesperson John Kirkby's answering questions about how it could have happened.
What more could they have done?
Yeah, it's really, it's devastating to see these images and to hear these early reports about the steps that they tried to take to protect themselves. But the Israelis, look, they've already said this was on them, and they're doing this investigation. We obviously want to make sure that that investigation gets completed and is as transparent as possible. And as I said in my opening statement, that there's accountability to be held here.
Let's talk with Mick Mulroy, the former United States Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East and the Pentagon's former top policy official for the Middle East too. Mick, good evening to you. Thanks for joining us tonight on Times Radio.
Good to be with you, Rick.
Now, Israel's military have said that the incident would be investigated. I'm just going to give you the quote here. Independently, professionally, and by an expert body. But how much can we trust that?
First, obviously, condolences to the whole World Central Kitchen team there. They're obviously people who put themselves in harm's way to do good for people, and they are, by all definitions, heroes. There definitely needs to be a thorough investigation and complete transparency. One, because they deserve it. It does appear that they did everything as they were instructed to do, and they were targeted. I don't think it was intentional, but that doesn't absolve responsibility, and there needs to be accountability when it comes to that. One, for these individuals, but also so that there's competence going ahead with people who may become involved in the distribution of aid, which is so critical, especially in northern Gaza. There has to be a thorough investigation that people trust.
Mick, David Cameron has been highly critical, hasn't he? In a series of posts, he said it's essential that humanitarian workers are protected and able to carry out their work. We've called on Israel to immediately investigate and provide a transparent explanation of what happened. What international repercussions could there be because of this event?
Well, part of it might actually come from the humanitarian aid campaign itself. There may be fewer people willing to go into these areas if they don't trust that they won't, even if it's unintentional, it still ends up with fatal consequences. And that is a consequence potentially of this. Hopefully that's not the case. There is still a dire need for people in Gaza, especially northern Gaza, to receive food, medicine, and clean water. That's one consequence. The other consequences is, of course, Israel's international standing. Quite frankly, they need to show that if this was an accident, I believe it was, how it happened. Because even if it's an accident, there could have been negligence involved. And that needs to be resolved. And they need to come up with a way of which they can give the competence to the individuals that will be going in to these areas to deliver aid, because that actually has to happen. So those are the two main things that I think need to come out of this investigation, and it should be open and honest, and it should be transparent, as has been called by many world leaders.
Yeah, I mean that criticism, it's been strong from the United States, to be fair, as well. I mean, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, paying tribute to the dead aid workers, saying we shouldn't be having a situation where people are simply trying to help their fellow human beings, are putting themselves at grave risk. What about the relations between the US and Israel after this, which were already rather strained?
That's true. Obviously, the United States is one of, if not the most significant partner to Israel, especially in security assistance. But I think we've seen a separation, at least, in how this war is being conducted, not the overall strategic aim of defeating Hamas, but how to defeat Hamas. And it's not just this event. Obviously, this has nothing to do with defeating Hamas. This is feeding people in need, but also the upcoming Rafah offensive, of which 1.3 million civilians need to be moved out of harm's way, or we could see a substantial amount of civilians be killed or injured in that offensive. And I think the U.S. has made it clear that the current plan that they've seen is not what they would like to see. However, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said it's going ahead. So I think there is going to be a further disagreement on how this war is conducted, and that's getting played out now in public.
Mick, do you think that, looking at the events of the last 24 hours, do you feel as if Israel is increasingly isolated over the risks that it's taking, over specifically getting aid into Gaza, that it hasn't got many friends left when it comes to those specifically, not the wider situation, which is a different question, but on the situation of how to get aid into an area that needs it, it feels very much on its own?
Well, it's important to point out the restriction of food to civilian populations is not allowed under the law of armed conflict. And to look at it from the Israeli side, they don't believe they're doing that. You could make your own determination on that, but they believe that this facilitation of this maritime corridor will do just that. And obviously, it has to be approved by Israel to happen in the first place. So the coordination is definitely something that needs to happen. The other part of humanitarian aid is it does, if we can get so much aid in there that it does alleviate the current crisis, it does give Israel more time to finish Hamas, which is obviously in their own strategic interests. In most countries that were attacked like they were on October 7th would have that as their overall objective. But they're getting a lot of international pressure to have a ceasefire. We've seen that in the United Nations. If they would like to continue this fight, and they have about 4 battalions of Hamas, which is around 35 to 4,000 fighters in Rafah, they need to do, I think, what they can to alleviate the suffering of the civilian population, which should not be part of the equation when it comes to this conflict or whether to have a ceasefire.
Mick, it's been really good to get your analysis tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rick.
Mick Mulroy, the former United States Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, and also the Pentagon's former top policy official for the Middle East too.